Okay, we're going to break this down in a second, but right before we do, just want to give you an update. I misspoke before. The Tremaine Wilburn case, a jury has been selected, and we are waiting for the opening statements in about 30 minutes. We'll let you know about that case in a second. But right now, I want to talk about the Koehn case, and joining me right now is a very special guest, friend of the program, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, my very good friend, Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, great to have you back here.
Great to be back with you, Jess.
I'm going to ask you the same question I asked my last guest, right up. Have you ever seen something like this? In other words, is this just something that happens constantly across the country and we're just shedding light on it, or is this really a unique set of circumstances?
Regarding postpartum depression and the deaths of children, associated deaths of children, no, it's not uncommon. It's something that that I've certainly covered in the media time and time again, particularly over the last 4 years. It seems as though that an awareness has risen as a result of this. Now, what is kind of curious about this is the connectivity between the mother and the father here, you know, that strikes an interesting chord with me. I've read accounts of them just a couple of days after the death of this little baby, being in the park with their dog. They're happy. They're making funeral arrangements and that sort of thing. Postpartum depression, for me, has always applied to moms, and it's leaving me scratching my head a little bit about what's his excuse here. Because if anyone has ever been into the scene of one of these events that is pure neglect, it is one of the most gruesome things that you can behold, and it registers high for me, and I've got a relatively high tolerance compared to many people.
The details of this case are very difficult to describe.
Yes,
and the idea that he is saying, well, I thought she was that the baby was being taken care of by Cheyenne, but she had postpartum depression. It's a unique defense, and we're going to talk about it in a second. But let's actually go to the defense's opening statement from yesterday. It was very short, but very impactful. Let's take a look at what they said yesterday in their opening statement. Short, but impactful. The idea that, listen, when you hear the details of this case, you want to get a gut reaction, you want somebody to blame, but follow the evidence and don't rush to judgment. You're a juror. You're very different than the public who's watching this. And I think that was very important. I think that was a good statement to make there. But ultimately, that is the beginning part of their case, and we'll have to see which way they go. I want to bring back in Joseph Scott Morgan, though, to talk about some of the details of this case. Now, the idea of just letting a baby die, you know, that you fail to provide that critical care, is that something that you see a lot in these kinds of infant deaths? Or is it more where someone takes a deliberate action against the infant? You know, this is really the prime example of a baby who is left to die. He died from dehydration, malnutrition, infection from a buildup of fecal matter. Really, the details are horrible. So is that something you see a lot?
No, it's not something that's really common. You do see them as a death investigator over the course of a career. You'll see them probably annually, maybe a couple of times, depending upon the jurisdiction you're in and what kind of population you're dealing with and size that is. It's more common to see someone that has induced some kind of trauma, specific trauma. But again, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking specifically about neglect. I think some people could argue maybe in certain jurisdictions abandonment of care, because that's what it comes down to. But there's also the specter of deniability on the part of this kind of curtain that the defendant puts up relative to this. I've had cases where people have had indwelling lesions in their bodies. One case comes to mind in particular with a woman that had a kind of a presentation of erosive breast cancer, and she just chose to ignore it. She had indwelling maggot life in her body as she was existent.
Oh my gosh.
And so, yeah, you have these types of things that occur, but it leaves us in this world, and I'm sure these jurors kind of scratching your head saying, what were you thinking? What's your thought process here? I would have been very keen to have seen the voir dire here relative to this impanelment of the jury. I wonder how many moms and dads are on that jury, and
Yeah.
kind of how this is going to impact them. I know as a parent, it impacts me. Just when I hear it, you do have that visceral reaction, but it's really hard, to kind of pause in that moment and give thorough consideration to all the facts.
It's probably extremely difficult to sit on this jury because I know that this is one of the most difficult cases that we have covered here on Law and Crime, and we're going to talk more about it after our break. And I'm glad you mentioned what was in the mindset of the defendant, because when we come back from our break, we're going to play you his 911 phone call. Stay tuned. Let's talk a little bit more about the defendant right now with Joseph Scott Morgan. So, Joseph, one of the things that we keep hearing in this conversation is his behavior, which seemed a bit odd in the moments leading up to Sterling's death. In fact, we heard a witness yesterday say that multiple witnesses say that his behavior was a bit odd, that he didn't seem to show much emotion. And even before he called 911, he was told to call 911 by somebody who, like a neighbor or a witness. I forgot exactly who it was. And the idea that he didn't do anything, was that more shock, or is that more somebody who was trying to hide something?
Hard to kind of parse that out at this moment in time. I think that will be discussed openly in court. When you're merely listening to the 911 call, his tone is kind of very flat and matter of fact. To me, it's kind of shocking. I've read several accounts of this thing, and even people have stated I'd be screaming and carrying on, and that's kind of what you hear. And I don't know what this guy's baseline is. I don't know, and that's going to be important as well. I don't know what his normal day-to-day affect is like. Is he just kind of one of these people that's very, very flat and even, throughout his life? He doesn't express much emotion, right. That sort of thing. What is his baseline norm? And
that's something that we see constantly in trials, where the prosecution picks on those points of how bizarre the behavior is of the defendant, and maybe that'll work here. We'll have to see. I want to play the testimony, though, of one of the first responders, and this is a case where the first responders provided very emotional testimony, and particularly Tony Friedrich, who is about to testify right now. Because really, think about coming to that crime scene and what you saw. I know the details of it, if you've read about it, are quite disturbing. So try to understand what it was like for these people. Take a look. Okay, I want to ask you, Joseph, as we listen to this testimony, we have a lot of emotional testimony to play. How difficult is it really to walk into that crime scene?
You feel like it feels like hell on earth. And just so folks at home know what she would have been experiencing, if anyone in our audience has ever smelled ammonia, is the first thing. And there's a distinct delineation, Jesse, between what decay smells like regarding a dead body, as opposed to what this neglect environment smells like, where you have feces. You've got this outpouring of urine, which in his last moments, he would not have been producing much urine. But the ammonia smell arises from unchanged diaper. And this child sitting in this kind of squalid environment. And that's one of the first things that strikes you. And it's always this olfactory sensibility that you have. And then you marry that with the idea of them witnessing the sensory thing, where they're witnessing with their eyes what's before them, and you can't imagine it. They talked about the lifeless body of the child in this swing. Child's head is thrown back, the eyes are recessed, and that's very common in these malnourishment cases.
It's so horrifying. It's so horrifying. I mean, it doesn't get worse than this. I've covered a lot of cases here, Law and Crime. This is one of the more difficult ones, I'll tell you that much right now. But we have to talk more about some of the key pieces of evidence from yesterday. And one of the key pieces of evidence that we saw was the body cam footage of Sheriff Martin Heeman when he interviewed the defendant. Take a look. Wow, she is terrifying. Anthony, great reporting as always, and go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. Okay, as I said at the top of the program, we're going to be live in 3 different trials. You can watch them at any point on lawandcrime.com. Again, lawandcrime.com. You can watch any of the feeds into these courtrooms and watch the trials. But here on the network, I think we're about to go live in Keene in a second. But before we do, maybe I could ask one quick question from my guest, Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University. So, Joseph, what do you expect today? I mean, what is important for the jury to hear about the death of Sterling in order for the prosecution to prove their case?
Well, I think that they're going to begin to go down this path of painting the life, what the life was like for this little child, and that's from a prosecutorial standpoint, to try to breathe life, if you will, into this little angel that died in such a horrific way. And again, that poses this obstacle that the defense is going to have to overcome to try to humanize their client, just to say that it was a mistake. He chose this partner in life to take care of the baby, and she failed miserably, to try to put the onus on her. So, we're going to be able to peek through the door here a little bit and see what kind of narrative they're going to begin to talk about relative to this little child.
Yeah, it's a tragic case, but we are live right now in it. That's right, we are live in the Keene case, so let's go right now into this live courtroom feed. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in court right now with Joseph Scott Morgan. So analyzing the house, how important is that? What are we trying to look at right now?
Well, again, this goes back to the narrative that I was speaking of earlier. They're trying to give the jury and members of the court an idea as to what kind of life these people were living and what kind of world that they indwelled. And this is one of the jobs that you have to do from an investigative standpoint in order to listen. You become kind of almost a historian if you're a crime scene investigator and a detective. You're capturing a moment in time where you're going back, because the jury didn't have the benefit of seeing this in real time. These guys did. They're documented through photography, through sketches, and all these sorts of things. So that's what's going on here.
Yeah, well, let's learn a little bit more about it once we take our break. We'll be right back right after this. Okay, so let's break down what's happening right now. I'm here with Joseph Scott Morgan. We're learning a little bit more about the house, that there was a lot of snack foods around. There was also baby formula around. I mean, well, what are we trying to get at here? We can't forget the fact that Sterling was not the only baby in the house. Mr. Keehn also had a 2-year-old as well, who miraculously lived and survived and is okay. But what are we learning at?
Yeah, what they're trying to paint here, Jesse, is this idea that well, everyone else in the home was well taken care of. We had, not just bare essentials. We had snack foods. I heard them mention many vanilla wafers that were, that they had thought and given time to purchase these items. We had sodas and fruit drinks and all these sorts of things that are found in the refrigerator. And what the prosecution is attempting to build here through the eyes of the crime scene investigator is that this is an ordered environment. We have receipts where they've gone out and purchased items, and we have a whole list of things that they have on hand. But yet, we have the deceased, a little child, in the other room, and this is in the back of the jury's mind, that has died of malnutrition and neglect, and it's a stark contrast here.
Strong point by the prosecution, and thanks for elaborating that. Thanks for elaborating that, Joseph. Really important. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be live in the courtroom, and I want to let you know right now one quick update in the Love case. The judge has said that the case is officially rested, and we are expecting closing arguments soon. We'll be back live. Stay tuned. Okay, so Joseph, I want to talk to you about what we're seeing, and you mentioned it earlier. We know that there was another baby in the house, and we know that they were able to take care of that baby. We know that they were able to take care of themselves. We're getting that from understanding what the whole house looked like, and there were parts that were neat and clean, and they had lists for food, and they were fully stocked. But Sterling's room, that I want to make sure I got this, 81-degree room, stench of urine, living in his own filth, and died as a result of everything, that seems to show a more deliberate action.
Yeah, it does. Why would there be that much of a delineation between the rest of the house and the room in which this baby was indwelling? And it's a stark contrast, isn't it? And it's one of the things that, again, the prosecution is going to try to utilize in painting this picture. And can I just go back for just one quick moment to an image that we saw prior to trial starting up today? One of the most compelling things I've seen so far today, and that was that image from the police officer's vest cam of the initial interview that he conducted with the accused and that 2-year-old that was seated on his lap. You saw them, he was holding that child tight. The child looked well nourished. She was alert, aware, these sorts of things. All the things that Sterling was not. And I think that probably if that is put up in court, if they're fully aware of this, that's going to hit the defense like a 10-pound sledgehammer.
Great point. And we are talking about what's child abuse. I mean, that's really the center focus of this case. And sadly, we see this kind of the pattern throughout the country. In fact, we have a quick statistic. Just look at this in 2014. Almost 1,600 children died as a result of abuse and neglect. That's between 4 and 5 children a day. And
Yep.
we're highlighting that here on Law and Crime in this particular case, but how sad can you get? We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll talk a lot more, and we'll be live back in this case.
Do you know whether the credit card...
Okay, so Special Agent Jim Teal is now under cross-examination. And Joseph, are we getting the sense what the defense is trying to point out here that, hey, listen, there's no indication that his room, maybe the door was open, maybe there was a problem with the thermostat. We can't automatically assume that he was left in a terrible condition.
No, we can't, and that's what but we can't necessarily assume that. But the important thing is that the investigator doesn't work on assumptions. What they're attempting to do, and what the investigator is attempting to do, is paint a very exacting picture, documenting along the way. That's one of the things that I teach my students at Jacksonville State. We have to document everything and every step that we go through along the way, so that when we're drawn into question on the stand, we just simply state the facts as we observe them at that moment in time. Remember, you can't go back. You cannot go back. You only get one chance at the crime scene initially. So that's why, and a lot of the stuff seems very, very tedious, I'm sure, to many of our viewers.
Right.
But it is very important that that everything be documented in a very exacting manner.
Yeah, that's exactly, especially in this case. Joseph, stand by. I want to let our viewers know one other thing before we go to our next break. If you go to NBC Universal's Watch Back app and you check out Law and Crime, there's a documentary on there of the Larry Nassar case. If you go on there, you can enter to win a very cool prize, and that is a signed copy of Dan Abrams' book, Lincoln's Last Trial, the murder case that propelled him to the presidency. You can get a signed copy from our very own Dan Abrams, and it should be noted that this book was just nominated for Best History and Biography Story by the Goodreads Choice Awards of 2018. So you want to check that out. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. So they are in a break right now in the Koehn case. So we're going to switch gears and talk about the Love case. But before we do that, I have to sign off our very special guest, Joseph Scott Morgan, who was great this morning to break down really the grisly and gruesome details of this case, but from a really interesting perspective. So, Joseph, before I sign you off, any final thoughts about the Koehn case as we come back from the break in a little bit?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that kind of sticks with me in some of my reading about this case, and I think that it kind of sums everything up, They were going through the inventory of the items that were there at the scene. And one of the most compelling things for me is going to be the fact that this precious little baby sat in this swing in a filthy, dirty diaper. But yet, in that same room, there are bundles of clean diapers and wipes and A&D ointment and all these things to care for a baby. And I think that kind of sums things up. I think that that's going to be a very difficult uphill battle for the defense to fight in this case.
Right. I mean, the cause of death was failure to provide critical care. Joseph, thank you so much. Appreciate your insight as always.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right, everybody, we are about to go live right now into the Christopher Love case. The defense is presenting their closing argument. This is their last chance to try to save the life of their client because we know what's on the table, the death penalty. Let's go live.